Professor Nimrod Bwibo was born to Reuben Odundo Mulamba and Rebecca Achola on Friday afternoon, 2nd January 1931, in what was then called North Kavirondo, North Nyanza, Western Province. As a boy, Nimrod saw some of the early missionaries whose coastal porters saw Luo women sitting on their heels and cited this in Kiswahili, which was Wanakaa Virondo. The missionaries picked this up and called the region Kavirondo. His father was the head of Busiada Church run by the Church Missionary Society, CMS. CMS was active in promoting religion, healthcare, and education in the regions they operated. His first contact of healthcare was through his father, who had been trained by CMS at Butere in health provision and who was the provider of treatment of tropical ulcers in the village.
He told me that his dad used to take care of neighbors, those the tropical ulcers, and he used to assist his dad. That's how he was interested in medicine. Yeah. In fact, everybody, they tried to discourage him because medicine was a long course, and again you are dealing with the dead bodies. So they discouraged him so much. Even the dad also discouraged him, but he was only interested in medicine.
Nimrod started school in 1941 at Bukalire Elementary School in Busia district. Elementary school was from standard 1 to 5. His academic prowess was evident at an early age. He dispensed with his primary education within 5 years instead of the usual 7 years. He attended primary and junior secondary school from 1946 to 1950 at the Government African Schools, GAS, Kakamega. He passed his Kenya Advanced Primary Education, KAPE, examinations in 1948. He was admitted to the prestigious Alliance High School and went on to pass the Kenya Africa Secondary Schools Examination, KASE, in 1950, attaining the first position in GAS Kakamega. For the first time in his life, boarded a train to travel to Kikuyu. Being from a humble background and having no shoes, he acquired an old pair of his uncle Japheth's size 8 shoes, which he filled with pieces of cloth and adopted a strategic manner of walking, lest they unceremoniously dropped off his small feet. At Alliance, under the headmastership of Mr. Kerry Francis, he excelled and obtained the University of Cambridge Overseas School Certificate, a first grade, in the year 1952. Young Nimrod was then admitted to the University of East Africa, Makerere College, in March 1953. A Makerere University lecturer, Professor Derek B. Jalif, Professor of Pediatrics, was pivotal with visiting registrar lecturers from the Institute of Child Health in London in the implantation in Nimrod's mind of his cherished aspiration to become a children's doctor, a pediatrician.
He told me that when he was young, he was taken to his aunt to be a babysitter. That's when he learned to love children. He took care of them when he was before schooling. Then after that, that's when he left to go to school.
Nimrod took a bold and deliberate decision to marry in June 1960, which was 6 months before the final examination in his medical school, in order to have a partner to support him in his great task ahead, that of being a dedicated doctor and a servant of the sick people. Nimrod married Hilda Namukono in June 1960. As they proceeded on their honeymoon, calamity struck when their bus lost control and they were pulled out of a river 15 kilometers from home. Taking it in their stride, they walked back home to find mourning and wailing in full swing as a grapevine had it that they had ceased to exist from among the living. After a sojourn, they set out again on their honeymoon and were later blessed with 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, Willis, Evans, Rose, and Edith, respectively. Nimrod finished his courses at Makerere in December 1960 and traveled with his wife to Nairobi, where he was employed in 1961 as an intern doctor at King George VI Hospital, which became Kenyatta National Hospital at Kenya's independence.
He eventually left Makerere largely because of the changes and when Amin took over. In fact, he used to tell us when he was in Makerere, his home, Kampala was closer to his home. It was easier for him to drive to his home from Kampala than, of course, from Nairobi. It was a lot shorter. But when things changed and life became a bit difficult, he said, I have to leave because now things are not easy for me to be going back and across the border. Because, of course, those days we were all East African, so it was easy to go across. You didn't need any identification to cross the border.
He went down in the history of the hospital as the first doctor to diagnose appendicitis and also the condition of rickets in an African patient.
I think one of the groundbreaking researches that he did was rickets. Because rickets is a disease of soft bones caused by inadequate calcium in the bones. And one of the contributing factors is not having enough sunlight, because sunlight activates vitamin D in the body, and then vitamin D pushes the calcium in the bones. And it wasn't expected in tropical Africa, where we have sunshine from January to December, that there's rickets. And he recognized some of the first cases of rickets in this country, and went on to do research in the area and described that this was an increasing problem.
It cost his immediate supervisor a princely sum of 100 shillings when he declared that should Nimrod's diagnosis prove correct, he would recant his previous diagnosis and give him 100 shillings. Nimrod's salary was 600 shillings per month.
So when he was writing his manuscript about his life, we would talk about it. And then I told him, Baba, do you know, I actually have... So I read a part where, because like they were the group who did the first operation for this, the Siamese twins. I told him, Baba, I have that cutting. He was like, what? You have that cutting? I said, yeah. So I actually brought him the cutting.
At the Kenyatta National Hospital, Professor Bwibo took part in the first ever successful surgery on the African continent to separate conjoined twins. He was in a team of 22 specialists at the separation operation of the Siamese twins held at Kenyatta National Hospital on the Sunday, 18th December 1977. The team was led by Chief Surgeon Mr. Roy Miller, a specialist surgeon with over 30 years' experience in operative surgery. The twins were born at Thika District Hospital on 21st November 1977, delivered by caesarean section weighing 14 pounds. In early 1962, Professor Bwibo was posted to Kiambu District Hospital as the African Assistant Medical Officer. Pre-independence segregation existed where the whites and the Asian doctors were medical officers while the Africans were assistant medical officers.
In those early years, we were so few pediatricians. In fact, when I joined the Department of Pediatrics, we were only 3 non-white in the department. Professor Bwibo, Professor Ongeri and myself. And in the whole Ministry of Health, there were only 2 pediatricians. Dr. Martin Odori and the late Dr. Steve Kimemia. That is all. 5 pediatricians in public service who were non-whites. The rest were all from McGill University, Montreal, and from the United States.
Nimrod was very skilled in performing caesarean section, an art he had thoroughly learned from the professor of obstetrics, Professor Rindle Short, whose operations at Mulago Hospital he used to observe keenly. At Kiambu, he would operate on pregnant ladies with ease, and when these mothers returned for removal of stitches, they would proudly admire the wounds on their abdomen. This is because Nimrod used plastic surgical techniques to stitch their wounds, the technique learned from Dr. Michael Wood, the plastic surgeon at King George VI Hospital during his internship. Between 1961 and 1971, Nimrod's professional career as a doctor experienced dynamic growth and involved a lot of movement between countries and continents, from Nairobi to Kiambu, then thereafter to Mbale, Uganda, Kampala, Uganda, California, USA, Washington, Seattle, USA, London in the UK, back to Kampala, Uganda, and finally back to Nairobi, Kenya. Professor Nimrod Bwibo embarked on what at the time was risky venture to specialize in pediatrics and be a children's doctor. The first risk was obvious. In the Ministry of Health of the Government of Kenya categorized pediatrics as a minor discipline, and there was no plans to establish posts for pediatricians.
Earlier on, before we had a local postgraduate program, there were very, very few pediatricians. But Makerere, I think, was the one which started the postgraduate first. And when Prof. Bwibo came to Nairobi, he also initiated the postgraduate program at the University of Nairobi.
Professor Derek Jelliffe became an invaluable friend, a mentor, and guide who was instrumental in navigating Nimrod through his pediatric master's qualification. It started with Nimrod resigning from the Kenya government post and taking up a one-year position in the Uganda Medical Services, where he would serve 9 months in the provincial Mbale Hospital, then move to Mulago Hospital in Kampala to start pediatric training proper, and after another year of service there, then he proceeded to the US for final specialization.
I think he had a big connection with people at Great Ormond Street Children's in the UK and of course in the US. That way he encouraged people to go and train and come back.
In September 1963, Nimrod moved to University of California, USA for postgraduate studies.
I was the only doctor in a class of 25, 21 being Americans. It was initially a time of challenge, as when I began my training at the University of California Medical Center and later the San Francisco General Hospital in San Francisco at the Medical Center, there were initial doubts about my training, qualifications, and ability as a doctor from Africa. Internship doctors assigned to me for supervision accepted reluctantly, only to discover later, using their words, "The guy knows." My theoretical knowledge was good, and I earned a nickname, Professor, from fellow students. To put this in perspective, some of my American colleagues confided in me that they initially believed that Africans wore no clothes and arrived naked in the US and were clothed at New York airport on arrival. So I took pride in showing them my Mbale suits, which I explained were tailored and made back at home in Mbale city in Uganda, in Africa. And for the duration of my stay in the US, I never bought any suits in the US. One evening, in hospital, I admitted a baby with jaundice due to blood group incompatibility, hence requiring exchange blood transfusion. The consultant asked me to prepare the baby for blood transfusion, which I did, and went ahead and carried out the procedure. Later, when the consultant called and asked the state of preparedness and found that I had finished, he almost went into shock and rushed to the hospital and found an active baby sucking gauze in which I had put glucose, as I used to do at Mulago Hospital. "How many of such have you done?" he asked. And I said that I had done several. He then admitted he had never conducted such a procedure. The next day, the consultant explained to the professor in charge of the department, who arranged for me to instruct the other trainee doctors, the medical students, and the consultants on how to perform exchange blood transfusion, which I did with a lot of greatness. The African doctor who had come for training now became the teacher. In another instance, at the University of Washington Medical School, I offered an alternative diagnosis of a rare condition called testicular feminizing syndrome in a young 2-year-old girl. The chief surgical specialist, to whose round I had been invited, had advanced the diagnosis of a hernia and intimated that I was being silly and unknowledgeable. However, this was proved wrong after removal of the mass and histology conducted ascertained that it was a testicle. This case and other examples where I was rated by the professor as knowledgeable made them ask, if you know all these things, why did you have to come? And my answer was simple: to obtain a degree in pediatrics, which my country does not offer.
I had the fortune of meeting Professor Bwibo when I was interviewed to join the Department of Pediatrics as a lecturer. Professor Bwibo was the chairman, and in fact, he is the one who recruited me as a lecturer to the Department of Pediatrics and Childhood at the University of Nairobi Medical School.
I first met him, I think on TV. I was somewhere in high school when I'd now been convinced that I had to be a doctor. So I was watching TV in my brother's place, and here was elegant-looking gentleman being interviewed by, I think it used to be called Professional View. And what was he asked? That, okay, we are talking about family planning and how to birth control. Then he said, oh, I'm not taking part in that one, because me, I'm a pediatrician. I want children to be born. So I sort of opened my eyes and said, okay, that looks like, I hadn't met him, I just saw him on TV. So by the time I came into School of Medicine and then moved on to the subjects which he is teaching, he was already a person in my mind.
Dr. Bwibo brought with him a wealth of administrative experience and knowledge on running of the Department of Pediatrics.
As my clinical experience grew quickly, I turned to publishing the results of my research, which was broad-based on topics of anemia, nutrition, childhood infections, childhood accidents and poisoning, and child abuse. I knew I had joined a competitive world of academia, and failure was not a part of my vocabulary.
Professor Bwibo, who was the head of department when you were a fourth-year medical student, was a very rounded teacher. His philosophy was, are you a safe doctor? Could you be, those days they used the term, unleashed the unknowing masses who will not be able to judge you, but they expect that you do the right thing. He believed in people being able to be not just good in their work, but also managing things around them. So we were students of Professor Bwibo. We worked closely with him as the head of Ward 10, 80, 81. And he wanted, in those days, to actually have pediatricians in every province. Those days we used to talk about provinces, there were 7 of those. And the idea here was to have a person who is looking after children across the country. So he had a wider vision.
Professor Bwibo used to wander around the provinces looking for and interesting people to apply to study pediatrics. He would not wait for the applications. He would go, there are many examples among some of the senior pediatricians who would have been thinking something else, then he happens around Homer Bay. The example I'm giving you is actually Dr. Nyikal, whom you know well, whom the world knows to being a politician. Just goes to where you are and says, Wewe, I think you are a good material for a pediatrician. I recall you as a student. So he went to hunt for people.
In 1972, Dr. Bwibo was promoted to professor and took over the chairmanship of the Department of Pediatrics and embarked on effecting changes and bringing development to the department with a three-pronged approach. The first was to expand the department through recruitment of local staff and give it a national outlook.
Prof was a pioneer in terms of pediatrics. I think when he became a pediatrician, there were very, very few African pediatricians at that time. And I think for Kenya, it was basically him and Dr. Odwori who were the pediatrician. And of course, earlier on, before we had a local postgraduate program, there were very, very few pediatricians. But okay, Makerere, I think, was the one which started the postgraduate first. And when Prof. Bwibo came to Nairobi, he also initiated the postgraduate program at the University of Nairobi. And then, of course, with the program, then a lot more pediatricians we were able to have many more people going through the program and becoming pediatricians.
I had the privilege of being mentored by Professor Bwibo, and I found him to have such an amazing insight and command of the subject, and also had such a very systematic way of transferring his knowledge and his skills to us as students, of bringing us from a point of bewilderment to a point of understanding and competency in the particular conditions that he would teach.
He always says he knows he would have been a rich man. He would have taken up a lot of high posts, but that was not what his calling was. His calling was to be here to take care of the children and to educate the next generation of children.
He quickly realized that pediatrics was growing and it was branching, and his department had to have the branches. I think by the time he left active leadership, he had created the neonatologists, he had created those ahead of me, he had created the cardiologists, he had created a nephrologist, that is Professor Ngeri, whom you know well. Just him. You're talking about 70s into 80s when those sort of things, especially in the so-called southern countries, were not essential. We hardly had enough clinical officers, let alone doctors. So why would somebody do that? But he saw this century at that time.
He recruited Dr. Judith Brown as a senior lecturer from the London and Professor Sinnett from the University of Washington, D.C., and Dr. Alan Cross from the University of North Carolina, USA, Dr. Rachel Musoke from Uganda, and Dr. Mohan Lumba from India as lecturers. He then established linkages between the University of Nairobi Pediatric Department with other international university pediatric departments. In March 1973, Professor Bwibo was elected to the deanship of the Faculty of Medicine and combined this with the running of the Department of Pediatric and Child Health.
As a university don, I was expected not only to teach well, but also publish. And I resolutely fulfilled the saying, publish or perish. I submitted my article for publication in the East African Medical Journal in 1967, and thereafter went on to publish prolifically. My published articles began to form a long list appearing in the regional East African Medical Journal and in internationals such as the British Medical Journal, American Journal of Pediatrics, Scandinavian Medical Journal, and Tropical Geographical Medicine. I was invited by editors to contribute chapters to medical textbooks such as Child Health in East Africa, edited by Professor Derek Jelliffe, Diseases of Children in Subtropics and Tropics, edited also by Professor Derek Jelliffe, Anemia in Children, edited by E.J. Ibrahim, Tuberculosis in Children, edited by Professor Derek Jelliffe, and Maternal Child Health, edited by Professor Helen Wallace, and Child Health, a manual for medical and health workers, done by myself and Professor Paget Stanfield, which became a major reference book in the region. Besides publishing, I attended and presented papers or chaired sessions at numerous regional and international medical conferences. The common saying that retired but not tired applied for me after working at AMREF, and when the University of Nairobi asked me to apply for a contract appointment in the Department of Pediatrics, I accepted and was recruited on a 2-year renewable contract starting from January 1997. The then Chancellor of the University of Nairobi, His Excellency President Daniel Arap Moi, had floated an excellent idea that full professors should be rehired at their retirement, and that at that level of academic life, the staff were highly experienced and knowledgeable and should be given opportunity to provide academic leadership at the university by guiding research activities and publications, as well as supervising and teaching students. And in addition to that, the professors' brains would be wasted if left to go home, where they have nothing they are competent to do. I took up the appointment as a mature and seasoned academician and administrator, determined to serve well, enthusiastically, with dedication, and carry out self-assessment of my performance and feel satisfied. My family responsibilities were minimal, so I worked full-time in every sense of the word. My duties included teaching of undergraduate and postgraduate medical students, assistance of academic staff in their publication papers and research, and involvement with my own research and publication. There were no administrative duties. As I settled into teaching, my unusual academic training and administrative skill set was sought out, and I was appointed chairman of Maseno University Council. This was exceptional, as such posts were normally awarded to retired senior government functionaries with political favor, whereas academics were more likely to be appointed to the posts of vice chancellors. I took up the posts, and this was an example of a call to serve, and I served to the best of my ability, guiding a team of capable, mature, selfless Kenyans who, in the space of 10 years, took the university from debt, disrepute, disrepair, inadequate health service, lack of halls of accommodation, stalled projects, and corruption to a sterling institution of learning, owning its own farm, an ultra-modern hotel, a modern e-learning multi-story building, and town campus within Kisumu City.
As I continued to benefit from his mentorship and supervision, I began to realize that he was the father of the School of Medicine. Our original curricula for the MBCHP program, he, together with others, actually wrote it. And I came to discover this when we were having an accreditation by the Commission on University Education, and we were asked to bring out our curricula for undergraduate doctors training, for postgraduate doctors training, and we looked everywhere for it, and it was from 1976. And who provided it? Professor Bwibo. He said, here it is, we wrote it with so-and-so and so-and-so, and it was one of the most well-written medical curricula that we hardly have. When we revised it and updated it, we hardly had to make any changes.
And some of the major landmark points on the nutrition, malnutrition, outside hospital even were done by him. So that was his strongest point. It's very well published, I think, over 100 papers or so in big places, participating in writing books and that. But child nutrition was his pet research area. You'll find about 90% of his work would have been there.
Considering that the population of most of the African countries, including Kenya, half of the population is children, I think the children of the country have benefited because we have many more pediatricians through his initiative at both the department. He became principal. He was at one time even deputy vice chancellor, academic. At one time he was even with AMREF. So all these areas, he pulled people to actually look at children, the needs of children, the rights of children to be treated like their needs and so forth.
I know they did work on jiggers. And so one time he was in Western Kenya helping this NGO to remove jiggers from children's feet. And he says, like, for him, it wasn't just a job, it was something that even he had experienced as a child, because he had, like I said, he used to be shipped off to his relatives, and he was once shipped off to some relatives, and he came back infested with jiggers, and his uncle told him never to go back there. Yeah. So I think he did that. I mean, because he had experienced it firsthand, he knew what the kids were also going through.
Another initiative of Professor Bwibo was the provision of numerous medical libraries in provincial hospitals, many now converted to medical training colleges and university departments. His ability to mobilize resources when he saw a need was exceptional.
He was the pioneer of developing the local pediatric master's training program, because there was none when he was training. He had to train abroad. But he came and was a pioneer to develop the curriculum and to bring this specialist training here, well ahead of other universities in the region.
Not many of us are able to foresee what you want, so you work at the present, and things take you by surprise. But there are people, and I think Prof. Bwibo was one of them, who saw far and say, yes, we want to grow, and there's no way you can grow by sitting in one place. You have to move here or there, pull people that you say, okay, I know I can't work alone, come, let's work together, come, let's work together, encouraging teamwork, because most of these things you can't actually do them alone. So when you work as a team, then you said, okay, now, what have you gotten? Let's see, how can it work? What can we push forward? And so forth. And he was very good at that kind of pulling people to see what.
Other notable successful mobilization was a $1 million funding from Finland that was utilized in East Africa for the successful child survival program. He secured $5 million from the black congressmen in the US, which was used in Tanzania to set up a complete modern hospital radiology unit. He also obtained donors to fund Department of Pediatric Infrastructural Development from Japan and US Howard State University.
Kenya Pediatric Association, actually, when we read through the history, and I gave some of the things that to the Secretariat, actually started in 1968. And Dr. Odori was one of the people who were within the first committee. But knowing that Dr. Odori and Prof. Bwibo were working together, so I'm almost certain that behind the scenes, even though he wasn't in the executive, he played a big role. And as I said earlier, those days there were very few pediatricians. In fact, he used to tell us they used to meet in each other's house because there were so few.
And they grew towards converting it from an initially private sector organization into now something that encompasses all public service and private service. So he is out there among the people together with Dr. Lumba, I think Dr. Njai, who are the founders, so to speak, and some of the Canadians that were founded the department. Beyond that, he moved from founding it to chairing it at some stage to spending a long time as the patron.
Our first really exposure to KPA was in 1989 when there was an important meeting for African Society of Pediatrics in Nairobi. And as registrars, we are senior registrars in pediatrics then, we were able to participate. And Professor Bwibo was, of course, very central as the chair, I think, of the scientific committee of that particular meeting. We saw KPA at work, and we were to see similar other things as we went on.
There have been vaccines that have been brought into the country that we would never have gotten if it were not for the advocacy locally and internationally of KPA. One case in point is the pneumococcal vaccine, which we were one of the first countries in sub-Saharan Africa to actually get it. It's an expensive vaccine, the government couldn't afford it, but through a lot of lobbying and advocacy, we were able to convince the Bill Gates Foundation to support our country to bring it in. And the pneumococcal vaccine has saved many lives of children who would have died of pneumonia, which is the #1 cause of death of children in this country.
The association became active in supporting the government in immunization program of the children.
The postgraduate program has done a lot in terms of improving the care of the children in the country.
Professor Nimrod Odundo Bwibo was from an early age a staunch Christian and developed a strong culture of development and philanthropy. Away from the glare of his professional life, he picked up many destitute children all over the country from villages to marketplaces and paid for their education.
There's one time he saw a child walking kind of like in the opposite direction to where school was, and he stopped his car and he asked her, why aren't you in school? And the child said she had been chased away from school because she didn't have school fees. So my dad asked her to get into the car and drove her back to school and paid his school fees.
He built housings for bishops, pastors, and other church buildings.
Like at home, I know he built teachers' houses out of his own money. He's built churches. His father was a church elder, so he supported a lot of churches in the area.
He was the chairman board of the Busiada Girls Secondary School and St. Catherine Primary School and Technical Vocational Institute for the mentally handicapped, where he was a pillar in the development of both the institution and the children therein. Nimrod overcame 2 strokes and continued working with such inspiration despite the admonition of his family, colleagues, and friends, whom he had reminded repeatedly that the Lord gave him life, a vision, and this work to do, and he would perform to the best of his ability and rest when the Lord called him home.
He loved being with us. He always had time for us.
But he actually balanced his life so such that we never really missed him. We never felt like he took work first. I think he took his family first, and then work was second. Because I say that even when I was in boarding school, he was always the first parent to come pick me up. He never sent anybody. If he sent somebody, he was never there.
Our relationship was not only limited to the Kenyatta National Hospital. We would meet together as a family, and I know his family very well. There were many occasions when he would invite me home for various family functions or various funs together. Even when his grandchildren were born, I had the privilege of being invited to bless them and give my good wishes to the family.
If you go to the Department of Pediatrics today, the one he spent most of his active life, you'll see semblances of him because he regarded it as one family. Basically, and he ran it that way. If you insisted on calling somebody Dan, Fred, and you called him Professor Bwibo, he said, no, I'm Nimrod. We are relaxed here. Now we would go out in a retreat and everybody, because of his age, said, Professor, and now? And call everybody by their title. Otherwise, I'm also Nimrod, like you're Agri and you're Fred, and we'll go and play volleyball with him. And so he was that sort of individual who fostered a family in an office.
Before he died, he was in the department. And we were organizing, I think, either it was an exam or so. He told me, no, don't put me on the rota because I'm going to do the polio campaign in Kisumu. So I said, okay. And that's when he went and didn't come back.
When the Lord called him home on the evening of Saturday, 28 September 2013, at the Aga Khan Hospital, Kisumu, all were left in shock as he was last in the department conducting undergraduate examinations in pediatric and child health for the MBCB Year 4 class the previous week. And in Maseno University, he was being awaited by the students to continue with a polio survey that he was spearheading.
And in his last days, he tended to be disillusioned with the way medicine was going, how we had changed as doctors, we're not holding our own. And he'd keep on saying we need to, if you like, have some moral rearmament. If I had the energy, I would go from place to place, really talking about the need for us to re-engineer ourselves from a moral point of view in this helping a noble profession. He was distressed by the way things were getting done.
Towards his later years, when he was beginning to be uncomfortable with the way the medicine was developing, we went for a cup of tea once, and me and some colleagues, I can't recall who, he told us, he wants to start a movement, which he was calling moral rearmament of the East African doctor. What he meant is that he wanted to go to Mombasa and start there and walk all the way to Kigali to get the doctors. He would probably be a person who would frown thoroughly at doctors who are scruffily dressed, or drunkards, or generally behaving in a manner that does not depict appropriate culture of a doctor. So he actually felt that had gone away, or was drifting away rapidly, and he wanted to restore it in East Africa. Remember, he trained in Makerere and there. But beyond that, he was an absolute meticulous, to the point, to the ethic, to the rule, and to the regulation.
The young Nimrod set out to be a dedicated doctor and servant of the sick people. But it can be said of Professor Nimrod Odundo Bwibo, he taught virtually all generations of doctors in Kenya, mentored many far and wide, and is the father of pediatrics in Kenya.
Anyone who is a pediatrician today has either been taught by Professor Bwibo or his colleagues at that time. If not, then definitely by the students of Professor Bwibo. You can easily label Professor Bwibo to be not only the founder, but to be the father of pediatrics in this country.
He has been a mace bearer. He has been a father. He has been an innovator and a creator. And he has forged a path where others he has forged paths where others had never walked, that have enabled the rest of us to follow.
It can be said that he had run his race and he finished strong.
So he has really brought about the improved survival of children. Many of us today may not have been alive if it wasn't for him. We would have died in childhood.
Today, if he was here, I think with the current doctor strike, he'd be even more distressed. I think he was a doctor to heart. And maybe we become this as we get older, but I think it's important that we have the likes of Professor Bwibo and a little bit of him being left in us to continue the noble profession of medicine, particularly when you have the privilege of looking after children.
He has been a mace bearer. He has been a father. He has been an innovator and a creator. He has forged paths where others had never walked, that have enabled the rest of us to follow.
Yes,